Paris is one city everyone enjoys visiting for vacations. Apart from the delicious French cuisine, there are a lot of monuments that are educational and interesting. For most art lovers, the city is filled with ancient buildings with unique architectural qualities that would pique your interest. Some of these ancient buildings include the Versailles and Louvre Palaces in Paris. If you are familiar with French history, you'd know the magnificent Versailles Louis XIV made for himself was one of a kind, and no one in the world has been able to outdo His Majesty's idea. In today's episode, you'll be learning about these grand palaces and how they came to be, the motive behind the construction, and many more fun facts when you stay to the end. You are definitely in for a treat. Tag along with me as we learn exciting facts about Versailles, the Louvre, and the palaces around Paris of Louis XIV. Versailles. This impressive building became the king's official abode in 1682 and is located 14 miles southwest of Paris. There are a total of 700 rooms in this massive building. If you ever find yourself here, you'd probably need a map to navigate through, or you'd be lost. Versailles is not just a place for shelter. It also represents the king's achievements and affluence. Every part of this structure is simply beautiful. The garden view is breathtaking, and you've probably heard of the famous Hall of Mirrors. As the name implies, this hall has 17 shiny mirrors that face the windows directly. The ceilings are decorated with paintings of the Sun King himself, as he is famously nicknamed. Another significance of this palace is that the king hosted important dignitaries that visited the country in his Versailles. A little background about the great monarch. King Louis XIV is not just any king. He was the king that can never be removed from the history of France. As a little prince, he had spent most of his time in his parents' hunting lodge. It must be such a special place for him. He decided to expand the area into a magnificent building once he was made king in the 1600s. The land, which is now Versailles, was commonly frequented by French kings to hunt for games. At this period, the grounds were fallow and hence a conducive environment for wild animals. This must be one of the reasons King Louis XIII bought the land and built a hunting lodge where he visited for his hunting expeditions. When his son Louis XIV came into power, he expanded what his father built and turned it into the most potent palace in France during his reign. About half of France's yearly revenue was dedicated to this project. No wonder it was one of a kind. The project ended in a magnificent building known as Versailles. Every attempt to copy this most extraordinary building has been proven futile over the years. The Louvre Palace. The Louvre Palace is also a vital art piece in the history of France. It's been in existence during medieval times and has since changed from a defensive fortress into an art museum. During the reign of King Philippe Auguste, the building was first erected as a fortress to protect the city of Paris. Later, in 1546, the building was reconstructed into a sizable residential palace for King Charles V. According to history, the Louvre was first built in the 1200s by King Philippe Auguste and later rebuilt upon by other great kings France has known. In the 1400s, King Charles V remodeled the Louvre into a castle for himself and his household. A part of the building was developed into a public museum in Paris during the 17th century under Louis XIII. Before King Louis XIV left the Louvre, the Tuileries Palace was completed under his supervision. Sadly, during the wars, the castle was razed to the ground, and in the 20th century it was rebuilt into an art museum. What was the motivation behind the construction of Versailles and the Louvre? No matter how rich one can be, no one goes about erecting gigantic structures without a particular reason in mind. In the same vein, the Versailles and Louvre palaces were created for specific reasons. In the construction of Versailles, it was based on two major themes, which were to show the wealth of the king and also house the palace court. Louis XIV, the king, loves to show off his wealth and power. Therefore, when Versailles was constructed in such a way that speaks about his greatness as the King of France, the palace was also made to be a fitting building for the king's court. It was a way of impressing the Europeans of the uniqueness of French art. The 17 mirrors used in the hall of the palace were made on French soil instead of shipping from Italy like they usually do. On the other hand, due to several attacks made in Paris by their enemies, the present king then thought of a solution to protect them from future attacks. The Louvre Palace was hence constructed as a fortress surrounding the city against further attacks, especially from the northwest. Although in later developments the Louvre was renovated for other purposes, the initial goal remained to shield the city. Who were the architects behind these beauties? Versailles is, no doubt, a unique and alluring place. It also requires the touch of professionals to create such beauty. Different men of excellent caliber were paid large fortunes to change the course of history. One of these such men was W.H.O. He was the first architect to work on Versailles under King Louis. He started work in 1612 and built the king's and his queen's quarters. The men also styled the forecourts and servants' wings. To distinguish the new structure from the previous one, he covered the old palace with white stones. W.H.O did such remarkable work that his method was emulated by his successor, Hardouin Mansart, and others that followed. As I've stated earlier, the Louvre Palace wasn't initially built as one. In the late 1500s, under the ruling of Charles V, the renowned architect Pierre Lescot converted the square fortress into a palace. In alliance on the request of the king, he used the Renaissance style of the Greeks in building the king's new shelter. What about the decorators? It's one thing for the architects to do an outstanding job. The furnishings and interior decor of every building are also essential. The decorating style of every building speaks for its owner. Without being told, one would be able to tell how classy and wealthy the owner is. King Louis must be aware of this fact when he acquired the services of the talented Monsieur Lebrun. Lebrun was the first decorator at Versailles. He started his artistic journey at a young age of 11. His rare skills were evident in the fine decorations he did in the Hall of Mirrors, War Room, and Peace Room, to mention a few. Throughout his time from 1619 to 1690, Lebrun was put in charge of the king's drawings and the interior decoration of his chambers. Before he left the king's court, he created over 300 statues in honor of the king, including the decorations of the fountains and the marble design of the courtyard. Louis XIII was a great art collector during his era. Cardinal de Richelieu, the chief minister, was responsible for acquiring excellent works of art, which were in turn used to adorn the Louvre. A part of the Louvre, known as the Colonnade, was skillfully furnished by a team composed of architects Claude Perrault and W.H.O and the child prodigy painter Charles Lebrun. Let's talk about the building process of the Versailles. As the saying goes that Rome was not built in a day, well, we can borrow the terms to describe the building process of the Versailles Palace. The magnificence you see today took years of planning, construction, and reconstruction, furnishing, and series of expansions. As a matter of fact, we can extend the building of the French fortress over 4 reigns, from King Louis XIII's reign to Louis XVI's time. But, as history has rightly emphasized, much of the work was planned out and constructed during the time of Louis XIV, the Sun King. The Versailles Palace, which many of us marvel at its beauty today, started some 400 years ago as a hunting lodge. History has it that King Louis XIII was an avid hunter, so because of its proximity to the teeming game, the monarch bought this estate, then a forest, which spanned about 1,070 hectares of land. In 1631, the king built a proper lodge on the estate, with 2 wings attached to the main building. The building was a moderate one, described by the Duke of Saint-Simon as a house of cards, due to it being a frequent resting place for the king and his guests. After the king's death at the age of 42, the building was more or less abandoned until his son came into power. The Versailles building started as a leisure palace for Louis XIV also. Soon after his reign was established, upon winning the Fronde Civil War, he decided to make Versailles his official abode. Championed by architect Louis W.H.O, the construction work started on the estate with the building of 2 symmetrical buildings for the king and queen, and the breathtaking gardens of Versailles completed in 1644. In 1668, the central building process commenced. This time, the designs were directed at building a palace. W.H.O adopted Italian methods to make the mansion more spectacular. A stone facade overlooking the garden was built over the old castle with colonnades and flat roofs. He then combined this with an improved French-style facade with iron balconies and marble pillars on the courtyard side facing the town. After the Sun King won the Franco-Dutch War in 1678, he became about the most ultimate monarch in Europe. So, in a bid to showcase his bravery, he called the architect Jules Hardouin Mansart to build him a majestic palace to accommodate the court. He worked closely with artists Charles Lebrun and Pierre Mignard. Mansart built the spectacular Hall of Mirrors to link the king's apartment to the queen's. The royal manufacturer, Saint-Gobain, supplied the large mirrors used in this construct. What followed was constructing the king's great and small stables, which were stationed between the Grande Commune, house of the royal caterers, and the Orangerie, an extension of the building. The palace had north and south wings, each with apartments to house the court. Princes stayed in the more admirable south wing, while courtiers lived on the north side. The king himself moved into the building on May 6, 1682. Later, in 1699, the royal chapel's construction started and was completed in 1710, albeit by a new set of artists and architects. More construction work ensued during the times of Louis XV and Louis XVI. Much of what they did were refurbishments, but architect Gabriel's notable work happened under Louis XV's reign. This comprised of the building of the Royal Opera House, housing the concert hall, completed in 1770. I'm glad you stayed through to the end. I hope you find this video interesting and helpful. If yes, click on the like button. Share your views in the comment box. To enjoy more exciting videos, kindly subscribe to our channel. See you in the next video.